How are we enjoying New Orleans? Wow, I'm loud. Yes. After the parade they put on for you yesterday, there should be a cheer. How many cities can you do your Tableau forecasting model and then go down to Jackson Square and have a tarot card reader validate it for you? I mean, it's a pretty unique place. And New Orleans is great for a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons is a very unique combination of characteristics or traits. And I'd like to talk a little bit about a moment in New Orleans history. So welcome. This is a depiction of the Battle of New Orleans. So I don't know if you knew there was a Battle of New Orleans, but hopefully you know that the good guys won. Andrew Jackson in there pointing the way. This was 103 years ago, and it was the end of the War of 1812. And in this war, and I already told you, Andrew Jackson is leading the American forces, but they were very authentic American forces, and it was a very New Orleans moment because under his charge, he had soldiers from the United States Army, the Navy. He had state volunteers that were called up from states all over the United States. He also had a bunch of Choctaw Indians, freed slaves, and I kid you not, pirates from the Caribbean, all fighting for New Orleans to keep it a unique and authentic place made of interesting combinations. Now, if you think about that, we are also combinations. I'm going somewhere with this, I promise. So patience. If you look around at all at conferences like this, and you get to rub shoulders with people from different places, you see that we are a very unique bunch. And the thing that's interesting to me is that while we come from different backgrounds and have different skills, that we are all made up of similar unique components, which is our DNA, right? We're GATC. So you can make a me out of those DNA components. You can make a you out of those as well. The power comes in the combination of those components. So we look at New Orleans. The power that makes it such a memorable city is the combination of French culture, Caribbean culture, Southern culture. That makes it a unique place. So today we're going to talk about something we did that really unleashed the power of combining unique things together. My name is Brian Burnham. I work for Cerner Corporation, which you can see up there. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about a project that we did where we used the JavaScript API to build a portal. Now, before we get started, I was, in writing up the description for this, I was really curious about who would show up to this. So I'm going to ask for some hand raising here. If you're a BI developer, meaning that you use Tableau for a living, raise your hand. How many of there are you? Okay. And if you're a web developer on the technical side, raise your hand. You can vote more than once if you wear multiple hats. Okay. If you're neither of those, but you get to boss around people that do that or make decisions on their behalf, raise your hand. Okay, good. So all represented. I think there'll be something for everyone. I will admit that if you ask the engineers that I manage, I shouldn't be allowed to write code. You may have some technical questions that are slightly beyond my reach, but I already have permission of my engineers to hand out email addresses or to look things up for you at the end. Real quickly, to get started, Cerner Corporation, if you don't know anything about it, it's a great company, guided by a strong vision. I think all great companies have a core vision related to them. And Tableau, we heard this morning, they're all about helping people visualize data and derive meaning from it, right? Cerner is a little older than Tableau, founded in 1977, and it was really founded off a similar idea that if you provide the right information to the right person, that you can cause good things to happen in healthcare. And that's evolved from good things happening for a patient in hospital to now where we're managing the health of populations where good things can happen in communities when we track their data. So marketing made this slide for me. Lots of numbers. We employ a lot of people, almost 30,000. We're in a lot of hospitals. And I could summarize this. This isn't a statistic that marketing gave me. But in all likelihood, you or someone in your family has probably visited, hopefully for good reasons, a hospital that uses Cerner for its electronic medical records. I was very vague about that, but we're in a lot of hospitals and we help make healthcare happen. And really, the one number that we don't have up there that is the most important number at Cerner is the number 1. We know from using Tableau, if you view underlying data, that the real people that roll up to that aggregate value are what it matters, right? And the health of that individual person is what we're obsessed with at Cerner. So we want to make sure that our systems serve and calculate and do all the things they need to do, but they don't leave that one person behind, because ultimately one of those is us, right? All right, now I work in consulting, and the Tableau work that we're going to talk about today is used in my group for our internal operations. So the stuff that you'll see today is not healthcare related data, it's data related to how we help hospitals implement healthcare systems. Now, we have several different clusters of servers, Tableau servers at Cerner, and the one that I use that we'll see today is we call the corporate server because it's used internally. On that corporate server, we have 278 publishers across the company. We have almost 3,000 workbooks. That isn't just consulting, that's company-wide, but we're a part of that, and what you'll see today, we leverage that server to measure and or to deliver the metrics that we use to run our business. And I put as of 10/17 because that's always changing. We're growing, we're constantly adding new people to the Tableau world and analyzing more data. And this is an outline of what we're going to talk about today. We had a problem, and in exploring it, we came up with a kind of a two-step solution. First of all, that involved organizing our reports, and then secondly, that involved using the JavaScript API to advance that to the next level. And we'll get to that part when we get to it. And then also we'll have a live demo. So if for those of you that are ready for that high score on Candy Crush, we might ask you to pause that so we can get enough bandwidth in here for the demo to work well. But we will have a live demo if Wi-Fi willing. And then we'll share some lessons learned and then talk about how this tool has been adopted. And hopefully by then we'll have learned something. Or you will have at least, even if it's how bad my jokes are. So we'll find out. That was a test. Okay, so we started this journey, and my team's not very big, but it came together almost 2 years ago, and it included a web development team that kind of evolved to solve random problems, and it was half a dozen guys. And then the other team that we inherited was operational reporting that had come from a heritage of doing a lot of reporting services, reports, and had just barely started doing Tableau. When we merged the two teams, we decided that we would have a hackathon at Cerner. We're very much into the hacking culture, so we're not hacking anybody's medical records, but we're hacking solutions, right? We're having hack days and hackathons. And so we had a hackathon where we posed the problem that we hear often from our executives and business leaders: where is my report? I can't find it. We have wikis on top of wikis that are all out of date, that are really long and have lists and links to dozens of reports, but no one can seem to find the data. And Tableau is great, but if nobody can find the report, it's not doing anyone any good. So that's the problem that we gave to our group. And we crowned a winner from our group out of the dozen or so that they made up together. We paired web developers with BI developers. And the winner came up with an idea. Reportal was the name of the contest. And if you haven't figured it out now, it's Reportal. So you can think about that one. It was pretty clever when it came out. There's a controversy as to who's to blame for that name. But anyway, Reportal was the name of this proposed tool. And these are the mock-ups from the winning team that they came up with, the concept of how we would organize, use some type of custom web tooling to organize our reports. And after the contest, a few months later, when we got the executive buy-in to spend the time on it, we initiated the project, spent, I think, probably 4 months before the initial version was built, and then we've been kind of adding on to it for about another 6 months or so since then, and we unleashed Reportal to the internal Cerner world. and we've been using it to find our reports, thankfully. So this is what the first version that came out or incorporates this functionality. So what you're looking at is a simple search directory of reports. The blue items there indicate reports, and something that we felt was kind of novel in how we designed this is that a metric has been separated out from dashboards to be a unique item. So you could search by metrics that were contained in a dashboard. The green items there being metrics that are represented somewhere on one of the blue items, which is a dashboard. And we built it such that we could include all of our legacy content, which included SSRS reports, some links to some Oracle reports, and some other things. We need to be able to capture that to make it the one true source. But we really built it to include our new Tableau work that we were developing. And a couple other things that we did here. If you're a BI developer, one thing you might appreciate is that we recorded metadata about that report, which also included an owner, and we made sure that we were never the owner. If you get questions about reports and you don't really know or care why that number is that number, but someone wants to blame you for it, we figured out how to fix that problem. And when they asked us to make a report, we said, okay, we're going to put your name on it when you're done. Are you okay answering questions about that? And they were. And so that's been a good thing for us as well. But this was really the beginning. And we noticed something when we became a little more systematic in organizing our metrics and our reports. You take, for example, a metric concept of billable utilization. And here we have 9 different dashboards that include the concept of billable utilization. And so we noticed that if we didn't know it before, we learned it then that we were really rebuilding the same report a bunch of times. And we thought there's surely a better way to go about doing this. And after we did that, really, as we were releasing the 1.0 version of Reportal, the idea took us back to the original mock-up that the winning team had come up with. And their thought was, let's build tiles on top of these reports so we could bubble up one number to the reports. And if you know dashboards, I doubt your dashboards will ever have one number, right, that bubbles up to them. But the idea was very interesting, that we could have some type of a tile and show data rather than just showing a link to the report. And that was where the idea began. And as we went back and revisited that idea, we realized that there's some more work that we could do. And it was also probably Tableau, it's probably TC16. I attended a session here, a really good one, I think, about the JavaScript API. There's a lot of really good ones. So if you want to know the technical side, go home and watch those instead of this. But in those, they'll tell you how to do it. And I brought that back and sat my developers down and made them all watch it until they liked it. And then we decided sometimes, and once they did like it, we came up with this idea of incorporating, you're using the JavaScript API to make Reportal not just the directory of reports, but to make it a home of reports. And what we ended up with is this, which is a new layer to Reportal that we call the functionality Build Your Own Dashboard. So what we did is that we mirrored in content what we did in design on the original Reportal. So we said a metric is going to be different than a dashboard. In fact, each metric will be its own dashboard. And so billable utilization is a metric. What we also did is say there's different ways to look at billable utilization by department, over time. And so we said you'll have a metric and you'll have several views of that. And what we did was we created Tableau dashboards. And inside that workbook, you'd have a dashboard that would say, for example, recognition recipients up there. And it would be bar chart by quarter, one by one. And so we created a concept where we would fill out a grid and you could define different views of the same metric that would be different sizes. And what we'd end up in the end is something on this page. On the left-hand side, you'd have a catalog of metrics that you could use to build your own dashboard. And if you didn't like the view that we had chosen for operation or utilization and margin summary, that you could then request, hey, could you create a new view? And we would add one for you. Or if you noticed a metric was missing that you wanted to put on your dashboard, then you would put in a request to us. And instead of building an entire new dashboard with a bunch of metrics we'd already done before and adding something new, we would just create that new request. And then the turnaround time, instead of being measured in weeks, would be measured in days, which since then we've realized is that efficiency that we've been able to develop a lot more content because we're developing it in these little bite-sized chunks. And then this screen is the builder. We also switched roles. We learned that if we can blame the business leaders for metrics, that we could now shift the responsibility to building dashboards off our team onto our consumers. And so the people who use Reportal have access to this, and they build their own dashboards. When we started with we built some model dashboards that we gave them access to, and they used a lot of those, but we also left open the builder functionality, which we'll look at, to any associate in Cerner who wants to go and make themselves a dashboard. So you want to see it? Yeah. I shouldn't reward that to apathy right there with the demo, but we'll go ahead anyway here. All right. So this is Reportal. This is the development domain. I tried to clean it up as best as possible, but if you see Jeremy's weird report 19, then you'll know why. So you see in this world, this is the 1.0 functionality where we can go in here and search for dashboards and for metrics. And you can see the blue and also the green. Since then, we've added a purple concept. This will be what I'll be presenting on next year, right, Tableau? If there's anybody in the room. We went one level above dashboards, and we have something called a playbook, which is a conversation for another day. But is the idea that you might join together dashboards based on a specific meeting or a specific job-related function. But anyway, there's the catalog. You can see I've selected a report there, and here we have metadata in here. But this really doesn't have anything to do with Tableau, except that it links to a Tableau dashboard. So we're going to go see some stuff that does link to Tableau. So now that I'm in the builder, on the left-hand side, I'm going to see a catalog that has all of the metrics that I've created in here. And so if you wanted to put on X-ray glasses here and see what these actually were underneath, these for action items, there's going to be a workbook that somebody published to our Tableau server that has 6 dashboards on it that were built to size specifically to these different sizes. And when we built it, we used the range sizing because we have a lot of associates that have old laptops that have crappy resolution. We have some that have the new nice ones that have really nice resolution. And so we use the range feature in Tableau. So a 1x1 is actually a range of sizes to try and make it look consistent. But anyway, we under each of these dashboards, we create views to fill different slots. And so I have gone in here and created some. So before you phone a friend and run away with Cerner's business secrets, I'll let you know this is Superstore data with some Cerner filters placed over it, so foiled. But what I'll do here is I'll go over and click. I know orders by category is a 1x4, so it makes a nice banner to go across the top. So I click on it, it throws it over there. And I have another kind of a largish one, so I'll put order date to ship date in there. And you'll see they do have descriptions here. We have a drop down where you can say what type of chart it is. So I'm curious, like, oh, bar chart. If I wanted a line chart, I could look for something different. And then I'll throw in, let's see, clients by segment. And then these two guys down here, I'll put them down. If I scroll down, I'll see they're down here. And I can just drag and drop them in whichever order I want to. And if I go here, we have 2 levels here. You can save it, which preserves it for you. When you hit publish, you get to share it with the whole world. It doesn't let me see anything until I save it. So I'm going to save it here, and I'm going to call it, give it a name. I can come in here, give it a description. Without getting too into the weeds in our world, we like to line things to roles or to business departments, and so we have all that kind of things in here that would help make it more discoverable to people in that role. I'm not going to fill that out right now, but I'll save it because it'll allow me to preview it. So once it saves it, I can go back to the layout and preview, and we'll see what it looks like in that really fast development domain. Okay, I'll publish it, and then we'll find it in the search. So, okay, here it is. So So now when I bring this up, there's a couple things we learned about performance. And one of the things that we learned is that if you pull in Tableau and you have wide open filters, bad things can happen. Anybody noticed this before? And so what we did is we said, established a blanket rule that if you have not applied any filters to your view, it's not going to load anything. So you can see we have a polite message up there that says, whoa, that's a lot of data. Please select some filters. And what we've done up here is we created standard filters. So what we did is say, our metrics are probably going to be sliced up by the same major filters for most of the types of things that we do. There's two big filter groups. One is project related and one is business related. But we would go in here and say, for example, this first one is segment. So if I were to come in here and say, I'm going to limit this to a specific segment, which was new footprint there, and I want to add in some of our Premier, I can add those as filters. Once I define a filter, in the background, it's our React Native components there are dynamically loading in, sending those filters back to Tableau, and then loading in the dashboard. We chose specifically not to load with the filters open for performance reasons, because that's like opening up a dashboard without having set any filters. The nice thing now is that we don't actually call any of these views to come through until we already know what we're going to filter it by, and so there's less data being transacted, and it makes it faster for performance. So now you can see I have my information loaded for my two segments that I selected. These are all, again, Superstore data, just making cool-looking charts. But it allows me to come in here and define several different, I want to put in a Q care here, several different filters. When I've filtered this to my heart's content here, I can save the filter and give it a name. So and then I can also make it the default. So what this does is it's a little bit of a killjoy to load up a dashboard and have nothing show up without your filters. So if you, by making filters and making it default, now every time this dashboard opens, which is a really cool looking one with this filter on, let me take that off. Now every time the dashboard will come up, it will be pre-filtered, and it won't show you the error message, it will show you the actual data. And if you went to go share it, then the people that see it could see your combination of filters that modified the data. And so by making it default, you get a little bit more instant satisfaction, and by specifying filters, you again keep the performance going. And the other thing that our developers thought of along the way was, I mentioned we have two main domains of filters. We have different types of metrics about projects and how they're doing, but we have metrics about the business and how the business is doing. And those would have different sets of filters. One might be department, one might be region, right, for our clients. So what we did was these filters up here, when you hover over the filter, it outlines the box of the Tableau tiles that are affected by that filter. So if you weren't sure if region applied to a list of your associates, you could hover over it, and if it didn't light that box up, you would know that. And that was very important to us because we didn't want to show people data and have them not understand or misunderstand where it's coming from. So we wouldn't want them to think they were applying a filter that wasn't actually being applied. And so we used that hover functionality to highlight what's been filtered. And if you go into these individually, they are Tableau dashboards. All the regular Tableau functionality works, including visit a tooltip. We waited, didn't we? And there it is. So. And again, you can customize this to your heart's content individually, and then when you're ready to share it with the world, you hit the publish button. And then it can be found in the directory where you can specify tags and other things to highlight it. And if there are questions about that, or you want to see anything more, we'll have question time at the end here. But I will talk a little bit more about things we learned along the way. So using things we learned about the API. Obviously, they keep me away from code for good reasons. So this was our team in general, was our first work leveraging an API. So if my engineers can do it, they can't hear me now, but then anybody can do it. So it's a great API, very well documented, and it does a lot of great things. But this is our structure of how we have our hardware laid out and how it all connects. So we start over there on the left. We use a SQL server for our database. We have a Tableau server that renders all of our dashboards. And then we use a Node server, full stack JavaScript, and then use React on the front end to style components. One thing in regards to the filters that we do here is that we have gone through a couple of different efforts to populate those the filters properly. So if you remember back to the filters, some of those things we would know. If we have 4 regions, that's northeast, south, and west, we can hard code that in the database. Some of these are not as predictable, and so for those things, there is a function in the API that we could call that we could actually go ask Tableau and say, what filters, what dimensions will you be using, or what values would you have for this dimension, so I can pre-populate my list of filters. Because again, we're doing the filtering before we get to Tableau. And so we have some of that. Then we also have some other things that are values that we already know. So we'll periodically load into our database. And so we don't even have to ask Tableau before we set the filters. And that interaction happens, again, between our database server and to Tableau. All right, and to get a little bit more into the weeds of how the process works, when an incoming URL request comes, we query the dashboard. As you saw, if you have no filters placed, you get a bunch of empty boxes because we go out to look at that dashboard and we say, is there a default filter for this filter? And if there's not, then we will go through, populate the global filters, and then we'll ask the user to define filters. And we don't get to the bottom right-hand corner to generate the API calls until we already know the metrics and the filters that will be passed through. We make the API call, which then returns the JavaScript objects, and those then React will then embed those into the dashboard as it renders itself. And if you have some questions about how this works, I probably can answer some of those, and if not, I'll make my best guess. But you can go over this in a little bit more detail later. And this is an example API call. So if you're really fast at writing, you can jot that one down. I believe this is what one of the calls that they wrote to retrieve filters. This is mostly just an example of what it looks like. So we did actually do it. And I think these slides are also going to be made available. I gave them to somebody to give to all of you, so it's their fault if you don't get them. All right, so here some of the lessons learned. And some of these are very specific, but if you go about trying to do something like this, one thing we learned is that there is a setting that on the Tableau server that is there to protect against, I'm not sure what, but it will halt you if you start rendering too many objects in the same view. And so there's a setting you want to change, the VizQL server protect session. And when we went to the Tableau server admin and told them this, you're always worried like, they're going to say, why would you do that? Are you crazy? But they really didn't seem to care much about the setting. So either they didn't know or it's really not a big deal. Hopefully the second. But we had to turn that off. If not, what we saw was it would render one of the objects and then the others would fail to render. And then the slow loading, we noticed that this is where we came up with the idea to block the no filters defined because that did result in performance problems. And so we decided if no filters are defined, we're going to go ahead and block the loading of that view. Again, I mentioned earlier that we used the JavaScript or used the API to pull back values to populate filters. We chose to do those on some, but not to do those on others based on performance and having to make that call. And for those others, we went ahead and moved them into the database ourselves. And then lastly, some specifics on the target for where we rendered the web content as it came in. In order to do that properly, we needed to communicate the location so it would be passed to the JavaScript API, or pass the location to the JavaScript API. And lastly, how was it received? So we built this Tableau. Let's see, it's on the next graph, so I better not make up a date when we actually went live. But here's a map of the use of Reportal. So in its original incarnation as a search, the 1.0 version came out in November of 2016. You can see the line there, the reference line that for R3, called it R3 because there was a second revision partway through. But R3, which is the build your own dashboard functionality, went live right there at the beginning of March. And you can see since then, obviously a lot more traffic. Probably more interesting to me than to you is the colors. For you, it made it prettier. For me, the dark blue is consulting. So what we found is that the tool was useful enough that it had a broad base of adoption even outside of our area of the company. And since then, we've partnered with some other areas in the company to have their content added and open it up to them. But you can see a lot more traffic. One thing that didn't grow proportionally to the traffic was the number of dashboards created. We're still working on how we entice people to create their own dashboards. Here, the blue are my BI developers creating dashboards. The green are people outside of my team creating their own dashboards. And so we haven't got a ton of them created. So maybe we created some that were so fantastic they just decided to use them a lot instead. Or we need to work on some education there. But that's slowly being adopted. Compared to the view numbers, though, we probably have a little bit of work to do. And then on the far right, I combined charts here without labeling them. But the left is the creation of dashboards using the new build your own dashboard functionality. And the right is the views per visit. So we use Google Analytics to gives us some data, and one of the data points to give you is how many pages per visit. And we see with the adoption of the build your own dashboard, people are spending twice as long. So even if they weren't building a dashboard, they're spending twice as long on the site and getting more use out of it. So we like that and hope that it goes up. So going back to New Orleans and combining unique things, part of the objective of this was to help our business leaders find their reports. The second benefit or achievement there is what we find that makes New Orleans great, and that was allowing these new combinations of things to create new value. If you were to look at a metric like associate hours logged during a week, and if you were to compare that to remaining hours sold on a project, you create a context and there's meaning in putting those two next to each other, right? It's probably that how many hours are you logging versus how many more hours do we have to use on this particular project. Now, if you take the same metric and you put it next to remaining vacation days in the year, which we're all feeling right now because we're in Q4, all of a sudden those two metrics have a totally new context. So what we found here is by opening it up and allowing our users or consumers of data to build their own dashboards and to put whatever metrics they wanted to next to each other, they're creating that context and the unique matches and creating value to make dashboards that are fun and interesting for the same reason that New Orleans is fun and interesting and Andrew Jackson's Army was fun and interesting. And we're looking forward to continuing the journey and finding out what new insights we can get as we labor, probably like all of you do, to make our organization more data-driven. Please rate. I have some suggestions on the scores if you need information about that. All right. So you're allowed to get your phones out now. So go ahead and rate the session. I'd love to hear the feedback. I'm sure Tableau loves to hear the feedback so they can make sure to invite me back next year. Not too heavy hint there. There are some other great sessions I mentioned that everything we learned about the JavaScript API, maybe not everything, but most of it came or started from sessions at Tableau conference. So there are two of those, and both of those are repeated twice. So make a point of jumping in on those or watching the recordings later. That'll be big. And then I told you about the internal business-related boring part of our company. If you'd like to learn about how we're saving lives and doing exciting things like that using Tableau Server and embed functionality, then I encourage you to come to Tableau and Cerner's Healthy Intent, which is today, so you won't forget about it, and is more or less right after this after the bathroom break and when you find if they're having those pies left, which if you see one, grab one for me too. But that is, and that's even right, we even arranged for them to be close to each other. So I encourage you to go to that one and find out about healthy intent and what we're doing to help manage population health. It's good stuff. Thank you, you've been a great audience. And if you want to stick around for questions, I will stick around. And do we have a mic? Or any questions that I can answer while I'm big and tall and smart? Yes. Okay. So the question is, what kind of license do you need to be a consumer of Reportal? The answer is that we have a Tableau server license, and you don't need any special license to use it because it's a self-hosted server, and so anyone in the company can log in and use it. Mm-hmm. And no one asked about security, so you all you've fallen down.
What if there's a particular dashboard that's only accessible for X people and I'm not in that group? How do y'all mitigate that?
Thank you. So that was I was hoping someone would bring that up. But all of you should go home and feel a little bit ashamed of not thinking of the security, right? So what we decided early in the project was that we didn't want to mess around with security in another application, and so we honor the Tableau server permissions, and so it is possible that you could pull up one. What we have figured out is that you can hijack the messaging using the API. So we've found out is you can send a message that says you don't have access to this, which we have in there, instead of showing them a blank box. But what we do is that Reportal doesn't know or care who you are after you're logged in, except to show you your favorites. But for security, for a purpose of controlling data, we left that entirely up to Tableau, and then we hijacked the messaging to give a cute, you don't have permissions to see this, go ask somebody, or something like that.
Do that through the group settings, the user settings in the backend, or actually through like row-level security, like they just don't have data available?
So that's all done in Tableau. So the same way you would publish in Tableau now with row-level security or not, but when you actually publish to the server, the permission settings there would be honored because we don't do anything to change that in the API. So the API passes through the identity of who's looking at it. So we don't use this like a service account or anything. So it knows who you are, and so Tableau, as it loads, still knows who you are and will show you what has already been granted to you outside of the tool. Yeah.
First of all, this is really cool, so thanks for coming to show this to us.
I like it. Great question already. My favorite one.
Allowing your business users to take different charts, build their own dashboards, has there been any concern that they might be taking these different objects and building a dashboard and then assuming different things that maybe not be related to one another, or in other words, taking the wrong kind of takeaways from what they're looking at?
So the question is there danger in allowing, in handing over the keys to mix and match the metrics and then drawing inappropriate conclusions? And really, we're at a level in our culture we're pushing to use the data to make decisions. That if they came up with a bad conclusion, we wouldn't be surprised. But that sounds wrong. But first of all, we're trying to get them to use that anyway. And with the level of metrics that we have defined, the risk of that is probably low. It might be on the interpretation level that they would make a mistake, but on the data level, a metric stands on its own in terms of where it comes from. So I don't think we've run into that. But the short version of that is we're just happy to have them using it. So if they use it a little bit wrong, we might turn a blind eye because we just really need to get them looking at data before they make decisions. But yeah, I don't know that we found an example of that yet that has been a problem. We've only been doing it since March, so maybe it's coming. Yeah. Too many hands here. We'll start here.
I see that you've defaulted it to 4 figure dropdowns. How do you
That's good. So I'll show you something up here. Now that since you're around for the bonus period here, I can show you the real secrets. When you go through here and create one, let me go back here. So the question was, I don't remember what it was. I just really want to show this stuff. The question related to, let's see. No, go to. The question was, how do you add new filters to the top? So when you come in here and create a metric, this is the secret admin screen, so this is what my team would use. And the clients by segment metric was already created. What you do in here is you can create a new one, or this is an existing one. And when they come in here, they will give the view a name. They'll say what kind of chart it is, like a bar chart or whatever that makes the icon show bar chart. And then they'll say the size, 2 by 2, 1 by 2. But then they also will choose from a list of filters. So what we've done is we have certain filters that are available in our database. And so you can pick from any of those. And then when they publish the dashboard, all they have to do is rename that field in Tableau to match the name of that filter and then put it on the Filters tab. They don't have to actually filter anything. But as long as it's on the Filters tab, set to all, when they publish it, we'll be able to pass that through the API and then make it filter it that way. Did that answer the question? Okay. All right, in the back.
Have you had occasion to more successfully requested any enhancements to the
Have we requested any enhancements to the API? We have not, mostly because we really didn't meet any roadblocks. We learned a few of the tricks. We had to change some settings, but we haven't had anything stop us yet, so it must be pretty good. And we're also learning along the way, so we haven't got to the point where we're probably exhausting all the functionality. Yep. We're in the end.
I'm assuming that the filters box here is how you're associating what filters apply to what business that need to hover.
Yeah, the hover uses this, yep.
So it's not meta information coming from Tableau server, it's something that you're creating yourself.
Correct. And I think we made it deliberate, so because we opened this up for other groups to contribute metric boxes, and so part of the thought there is that way they have to acknowledge which ones they're using, and it's a little bit self-service for them, but they need to make sure that they don't assume that something is a filter that's not as they build it here. In theory, in the API, you probably could retrieve filters dynamically from the dashboard and say what filters are available and then populate those. But we wouldn't ever want to populate one that wasn't in our database because we still drive it down from the database level. Oh, this side. Okay. Oh, and no step. Yes. Okay, in the back. Tell me where the 3,000 came from. Oh, okay. So the 3,000 workbooks is across the entire company. So those would be teams outside of mine that use it. In terms of the number that my team specifically has published, it's less than 3,000. And the way we manage it now is we use projects to separate out the Reportal metrics because they aren't freestanding dashboards. They would look pretty boring by themselves. But we manage them in projects. So we probably manage probably 150 or so traditional Tableau dashboards. And then of the metrics, I think we have about 50 of the individual metric dashboards that we organize in a different project so we can keep it all straight on the server. Does that answer the question? Oh. The answer is we don't do a very good job of managing data. So the question is, how do you manage data that drives 3,000 workbooks? The answer is that right now we are in the process. Another group at my company is building a custom metadata management system that will be used to catalog data. We're also building a data lake, and so they're going to build a system that will allow us to define all of our data sources. Right now, it's kind of the Wild West. So, but we're headed that direction. In the back. So performance is a tricky subject because there are a lot of inputs. We have not had any performance-related issues reported to us. We did notice it during development when we didn't have the preset filters done because we had that in the back of our head to do it, but once we saw it happening, we realized that we had to do that. But we haven't had any reported from outside of the team once we had it done. Yeah.
Second question, you had users requesting like subscriptions
Yeah, so user requests for enhancements. We have a few of those. We anticipated the request for subscriptions because that's complicated now because you could subscribe individually to a little metric, but you can't get that entire dashboard that way. And we came up with ideas. You could use the API to render out a thumbnail or an image of those and send that out, or you could do it. We ended up, we haven't had an external request for that yet, so we, partly because we're not very good at managing or doing subscriptions today. But if you were to do it, it would be a substantial work effort, but we would probably use the API to try to build that dashboard dynamically and send it out. And the other user, see, there was another request. I'll think of it. Oh, raw data. Yeah, we do leave it open to allow them to export it individually, and because of the way with Tableau you have to click in the individual view to export it anyway, the raw data export is not as obvious, but works. We educate them to do it basically the same. You can block that in the API, but we've chosen not to do it. We default back to the settings on the workbook. Right, back to the middle.
Click into it. So if they click on one of those boxes, take them to the Tableau server view of it.
No, but you have all the contextual options that you would have in a normal dashboard. So the question was, how do you export? Do you click? We decided not to have clicking on a metric take you to a full-size dashboard. Instead, you allow them to export the data out. We'll go to the front. Cost is tricky. We're an investment team internal, so these were all resources that we already had. The team that developed this, probably full-time, represented probably, if you count just engineering time, was probably 3.5 FTEs over that time. Now we do a lot of projects, and so that wasn't solid. They get pulled out to do something else. But we haven't run the math on the cost, mostly because we don't want to tell our bosses that, maybe, in case it's bad. But the what? Over how much time? So we saw in there, we started in the fall of 2016, probably May timeframe. Our first release was in November. At that point, it was a little bit more of a part-time project. After November, we maybe dedicated some more resources, and then it was March that the last functionality was released. And then since about May, it's been in maintenance mode. So our engineers have moved on to a different project, and honestly, maintenance mode has been pretty light, so we don't have a lot of issues with it. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, right. Second row.
Did you take a look at the other, out-of-the-box portal solutions before you made decisions?
Because we're an investment team, the question is, do we look at any third-party solutions? And the answer is they don't let us spend money, really. So it was make it yourself or... No, we didn't. The weird thing that happened was in making this, our corporate group got a hold of it, and when they found it, they looked at it as a metadata management solution, as a data catalog, which isn't what we'd intended it for. And they've actually started patterning the larger project to build a data catalog after this because of some of the questions we answered doing it, but we didn't really look out and see anything that would work out of the box. And I had developers, and we got to keep them busy because otherwise they just play games and stuff. We don't have any, so the question was, do we plan on selling it? If anyone's interested in buying it and want to meet me outside the door, just kidding. I don't think it's properly packaged in a way that we would market it. Like I said, we're internal investment, so our clients are our own associates. So the thought hadn't crossed our mind. And honestly, because of the customization of it, there's probably value in building it your own for your own application.
So I'm just curious, you guys work with health records. How well does this work when you're dealing with data that's more health related, when you have 1,000 dimensions and millions of lines of rows and all that sort of stuff? I mean, it's totally good to use sales and super warehouse, but how does that translate when you're actually dealing with data?
So for Reportal, the closest it gets to health data is management of a project. So it would track things like design decisions and building a system. It doesn't ever house clinical data, which makes our life simpler for HIPAA and a bunch of other reasons. Now, if you go Pete's session, the session at 4 o'clock, we'll talk about healthy intent, which does house a bunch of clinical information. And in there, they have allocations for creating. They don't have the same filtering mechanism, but they have ways to create custom reports and add in dimensions. That is pretty clever. That's not just a trick to make you go, but they have done some interesting things there.
So on top of that, too, so you can select a bunch of different charts of that. Who decides what's the correct way of build out that chart? Is it sort of group that says, okay, these are the correct metrics, this is how it's calculated correctly, and this is how we're doing across the company? Or do you still allow for different sort of versions of the same thing and still let the user figure out which one works best?
Okay, so the question was how, is that decision on what metrics to create and how to show them?
Well, not just
Or-
how to show them, but like, you have pre-canned charts, right? So what happens if, like, the way that I interpret a metric is slightly different than someone else? Building the same chart, but maybe you get two different answers from it, which one's right? Like, how do you decide which one to pick?
That's where we leverage the concept of owner a little bit. So we have a metric owner, and because a lot of these metrics are driven by some type of calculation. Like if it's a KPI, there's a pass-fail logic, and we have a human outside of our team own that. So we say, we determine whether you pass this metric based on this formula that we got from them, and they answer questions. The better answer, more complete answer, is that we have a governance process where we have governance boards that review and approve creation of content, and they manage the. You can make a dashboard in here. You can also bless it as approved, and so they'll have a special icon if they're approved by the governance board and have been designed by them, which gives a little bit of control. So we don't block people from making their own, but we do highlight if it was made by, if it's been blessed by the governance board or approved by it. On the.
You want to eventually leave this to almost come up with like standardized processes and metrics across the whole company, right? Like right now it's a little bit of everything, but would you want to eventually whittle it down to like this is how we want to do things as a company?
Yeah, so we've reached out to similar parts of our company. Part of it is that in a company of 28,000 people, there are a lot of chiefs that want to do it their own way. And so we've opened it up to be used by other groups, but other groups do have very different processes, and some better, maybe most of them worse, probably. But that's probably more of a data culture change that you're talking about there, which is slow going. But we try to be good examples to show what we did. On the end, is this the last question? You guys can, if I get kicked out of here, then you can always talk. Oh, I didn't put this up. If you want to write down my email address, then you can. Again, it's a treat for the people that stayed to the end. But yeah, on the end.
Do you have design principles or style guides so that you don't end up with different colors for the same thing?
So the question is, do we have design standards? And the first question is it because you didn't like how it was designed? No. With the answer, we do. We have, at Cerner, we have both application design guidelines that we have a UX team that develops this. They're the reasons we don't use green and red. We are blue and red. And we have taken their recommendations and applied them both to the application design as well as the dashboard design. So both teams use those. Things like we don't use green and red, we use blue and red, using company colors, font choices, all that stuff. We do have a style guide that the company has created that we mostly try to obey. Now, since we're internal, there's less pressure on us to conform. If we were external facing, if clients could see it, then there would be more rigorous review of some of that stuff.
I'm more curious, so if someone adds a stack bar chart and this is showing the sales department and it's blue, and then they add, a pie chart and it's green, does that ever happen, or how do you?
In our world, so the question is, do we ever have a consistent use of color across the metrics? And so while you can go in the tool and mix and match metrics, you can't build them. And so since we have a few partner organizations we've opened it up to create them and publish them and put them in, 95% of the stuff in there is developed by one team, which is a half a dozen BI developers, and they created their own guidelines, so they are pretty good at you being consistent in use of color and things like that. Mm-hmm. Okay.
The thing that confused me the most is how you pulled off the data performance with having some, it's been kind of brought up a couple times, just such a wide variety. Can you talk a little bit about how many data extracts you have? I'm guessing it doesn't apply to
So the question is about performance, and what other secrets have I not revealed. I think the other most pertinent one related to data sources is that most of the data, there's data all over our company, and we've learned that Tableau is fantastic at what it's supposed to do. Unfortunately, it's so flexible, it'll let you try and do things that you shouldn't do. And a lot of that has to do with data manipulation as you're rendering a dashboard. So in learning that, we have jobs that run on our server, and we do most of the level of detail adjustment and aggregation on our server, on our SQL server, before it's rendered out in Tableau, which is also, we learned before we even did Reportal to go that approach. And also because blending is a nightmare and you can do weird things happen. So whenever we can, we will join the data or ETL the data into our database and then generate a clean a view or stored procedure that matches the level of detail needed in the dashboard for performance reasons. Does that answer your question?
Well, but if people are building stuff on the fly, it's just one giant live data source.
So since we evolved from the previous process I described, where we would build out views for specific dashboards, when we develop, most of these metrics, like I said, are developed by our own team. And so they're either taken from an existing view that matched the level of detail needed, or they'll create an even smaller, more aggregate one for that purpose. And in doing so, it will limit the amount of data taken back and forth. And again, since this is operational data, this is mostly secondhand data we aggregate from other sources. So it's like timesheet data, it's status of version 1 stories or JIRA stories. And so we're not talking about big data here, not as much as in Healthy Intent when they have like everyone that lives in the zip codes data. And so that probably also helps us out. You don't look convinced, but yeah, part of it's we don't have a lot of data, so that makes it easy. So the question is, do we have a semantic layer? The answer would be probably only by accident. So we go through, we do that on a case-by-case basis. We'll go through and ingest data. We'll build another layer where it's aggregated to the right point, and then use it that way. In the long term, that metadata management product that we're looking at putting together internally, which isn't my team, it's corporate, that would address some of that, and that would allow cataloging and data stewardship and things like that. That is not something we've put into process yet.
So when I'm creating my own view, that's in essence actually as a user. That's creating a workbook that's stored on the server?
No, so when you create a view, you're creating a row in our database that says, here's the name of it, and then here's the combination of other Tableau dashboards to pull in to make that view. So they already exist. What you do is you define the combination and define the filters for it. But the actual Tableau content never changes because it exists on the server.
So in essence, you're just storing my selections of which metrics in what grid position. You're not actually creating anything to be stored on the server.
Yep.
How often do you all ask your users to like refresh their selections, or do they still need it, or anything along those lines?
We don't, mostly because we're not to a point where it's gotten really messy. I think part of that, so the question was, do you go through and refresh or clean up and ask users to clean up? And we don't, mostly because we've only been live for less than a year. We don't have enough gunk out there probably for them to do it. And some of it is self-cleaning because when you create something, it gets favorited to yourself and it shows up at the top of your catalog list or your launch page. So if it's stupid, then eventually you'll get tired of seeing it and hopefully you'll inactivate it is part of the thought. You know, for screen real estate, you'll see, oh, I don't need that one anymore, and then go through and inactivate it. Oh, on the other end. Dashboarding framework, you mean like at the web app layer? That is a good technical question. Other than using React on the front end, I don't know any more of the details that we use for that. Are you talking about like the placement, the drag and drop? There is an answer to that question. If you give me your email address, I will make one of my people email you back, because I do believe that they use a framework or something for that, but I don't know the name of it. All right. Yeah, so we do, there is, and I didn't include a slide on this because I didn't want to answer this question, but the question is, is there a single sign-on method? And there is a way, at first we thought, well, what'll happen is it will load a bunch of views and it'll say login, and once they log in once, it will put it in a cookie and they'll remember who they are. But we do have a single sign-on, and we do actively pass through that, and I don't know exactly how it's magic, but we pass it through so we pass on a token to Tableau server so it knows you're logged in. So you won't get a login button there. You'll always get Tableau content. Also, and then in that process, you still get the contextual stuff for you for security reasons. All right. Thank you for coming and for sticking around. Thanks.